Over 60, top 5 nuts that weaken eyesight over time. Yes, you heard that right. The very nuts you've been told are heart-healthy, brain-boosting, and packed with good fats could actually be destroying your vision little by little. And here's the kicker, 99% of people over 60 have no clue this is happening. For decades, you've probably been told, eat more nuts, they're great for you. And in some ways, that's true. But after treating thousands of seniors over my career, I can tell you this. Not all nuts are created equal. Some of them, especially when eaten the way most people eat them, can fuel inflammation, accelerate cataracts, and even speed up macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness after 60. Now, some experts will tell you I'm exaggerating. They'll say, come on, nuts are one of the healthiest foods on earth. And I'll tell you they're only half right. I've seen patients lose vision because of these so-called healthy choices. I've seen the scans, the blood work, the damage with my own eyes. And here's where it gets even scarier. One of the nuts on today's list is praised everywhere as a superfood. Doctors recommend it, health blogs rave about it. But in reality, eat just a little too much and it can quietly poison your system and speed up vision loss. So let me ask you something. What if your daily peanut butter toast, your evening bowl of cashews, or that guilt-free handful of almonds isn't protecting you but blinding you? Wouldn't you want to know before it's too late? That's exactly what we're uncovering today, the top 5 nuts that can weaken your eyesight over time, why they're dangerous, and what you can do instead to protect the vision you depend on. But before we get started, do me one quick favor. Hit that like button, share this video with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel. Every click gives us the energy to keep exposing the health myths that could be holding you back. All right, grab a seat and pay close attention because your eyesight is on the line. Let's dive in. Why eyesight weakens after 60. As we get older, our eyes, just like the rest of our body, begin to show signs of wear. After the age of 60, many people notice changes that make daily life a little more challenging. The lens of the eye becomes less flexible, which is why reading small print suddenly requires brighter light or stronger glasses. This is called presbyopia, and it happens to almost everyone. The retina, the thin layer of tissue at the back of the eye that processes light, also becomes more vulnerable with age. Within the retina, the macula plays the most important role in sharp, central vision. Unfortunately, this is also the area most commonly affected by age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. According to the CDC, nearly 20 million Americans over 60 live with AMD, and the numbers are rising quickly as our population ages. Cataracts are another common issue. The eye's natural lens becomes cloudy, causing blurred or dim vision. By age 75, about half of all Americans will develop cataracts in one or both eyes. And then there's glaucoma, often called the silent thief of sight. It occurs when pressure builds inside the eye, damaging the optic nerve. The National Eye Institute estimates more than 3 million Americans have glaucoma, and many don't even realize it until their vision has already been affected. Although these conditions sound very different, they share a common thread: oxidative stress and chronic inflammation. The eye is one of the most oxygen-demanding organs in the body, which makes it especially vulnerable to damage from free radicals, unstable molecules that harm cells over time. When oxidative stress overwhelms the eye's natural defenses, tissues in the retina, macula, and optic nerves start to break down. This is where diet becomes so important. The foods we eat every day can either add fuel to the fire of inflammation or help put it out. A diet filled with processed foods and the wrong balance of fats can accelerate vision loss, while foods rich in antioxidants and eye-protective nutrients can slow it down. Studies have shown, for example, that nutrients like lutein and zeaxanthin, found in pistachios and leafy greens, can reduce the risk of advanced AMD by up to 25%. On the other hand, diets high in omega-6 fats without enough omega-3s increase the risk of retinal damage. I've seen this play out in real life. Ellen, a 69-year-old retired nurse, came to me worried about her night vision. She thought she was doing the right thing by eating healthy snacks like roasted peanuts and sweetened almonds. But those very choices were adding more inflammation to her system. Once she switched to more eye-friendly foods, dark leafy greens, fatty fish, and a moderate amount of raw nuts, her symptoms improved and she felt more confident behind the wheel at night. So the question I'd like you to ask yourself is this: when was the last time you thought about eating not just for your heart or your waistline, but specifically for your eyes? The truth is, eyesight doesn't have to fade as quickly as many people think. Yes, age plays a role, but oxidative stress and poor diet accelerate the process. With smarter choices, you can protect your vision and maintain the independence and joy that come from seeing clearly. Now that we understand why eyesight weakens after 60, Let's take a closer look at the specific nuts that may be doing more harm than good. 1. Peanuts, the inflammation trigger. Peanuts are one of the most common snacks in America. You'll find them at ball games, in candy bars, and in the form of peanut butter in nearly every household pantry. But here's the important truth. Peanuts aren't technically nuts, they are legumes, more closely related to beans and lentils. And while they provide protein and taste familiar, they're also loaded with omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6s aren't the enemy by themselves. Your body needs them in small amounts for things like brain function and growth. The problem arises when omega-6 far outweighs omega-3, the anti-inflammatory fat found in fish, flax seeds, and walnuts. For many older adults, that imbalance is exactly what happens. The average American diet today has a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 somewhere between 15, 1 and 21, when ideally it should be closer to 4, 1 or even 2, 1. That imbalance fuels systemic inflammation, and one of the most vulnerable targets of that inflammation is the eye. A large study from Harvard found that diets heavy in omega-6 fats were linked to a nearly 50% increase in the progression of age-related macular degeneration, AMD. This isn't a small effect, it's a major shift in risk. And it's especially concerning when you realize that AMD is the leading cause of vision loss among Americans over 60. In my own practice, I've seen this more times than I can count. One patient, Margaret, a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher, had a routine of eating peanut butter on toast every morning. She thought it was one of the healthiest habits she had. But over time, her eye scans showed early signs of macular degeneration. When we adjusted her diet, removing peanuts and introducing more omega-3-rich foods like salmon and walnuts, her eye health stabilized. Her scans actually showed a slowdown in the disease's progression. Margaret wasn't an isolated case. Another patient, George, 68, a former truck driver, always carried a bag of salted peanuts on the road. He complained of frequent eye strain and trouble adjusting from light to dark environments, classic early signs of retinal stress. After reviewing his diet, we swapped peanuts for pistachios, which are loaded with lutein and zeaxanthin, two antioxidants that directly protect the macula. Within a few months, he told me he noticed less glare when driving at night and fewer headaches after reading. Peanuts also carry another risk, aflatoxins. These are toxic compounds produced by certain molds that can grow on peanuts when they are stored in warm, humid conditions. While food safety standards keep levels low, long-term exposure can still contribute to oxidative stress in the body, which again, places extra strain on delicate eye tissues. So here's a question worth reflecting on. If something as ordinary as a peanut butter sandwich or a handful of salted peanuts can tip the balance toward inflammation, is it really the safe snack we've always assumed it to be? The good news is, making smarter choices doesn't mean you have to give up snacking altogether. Replacing peanuts with a small handful of raw walnuts, almonds, or pistachios can shift your fat balance in the right direction. Adding fatty fish twice a week or sprinkling ground flax seeds into oatmeal are other simple ways to restore that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. After decades of working with older adults, my advice is this: don't underestimate the daily choices. It's rarely one giant event that harms your eyes. It's the small habits repeated every day. Peanuts may feel harmless, but over the years, that steady fuel for inflammation can quietly rob you of the vision you depend on. 2. Cashews, the oxalate problem. Cashews are creamy, tasty, and often marketed as a healthier alternative to other snacks. But what most people don't realize is that cashews are particularly high in oxalates, natural compounds that can interfere with calcium absorption. When oxalates build up in the body, they can bind with calcium and form crystals, which is why cashews are often mentioned in connection with kidney stones. But the risk doesn't stop there. Excess oxalates also contribute to oxidative stress. And for the eyes, especially tissues as delicate as the retina and macula, that stress can accelerate vision decline. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has shown that diets high in oxalates are associated not only with kidney problems, but also with impaired mineral balance. Calcium, magnesium, and other minerals are vital for nerve signaling and muscle function in the eyes. When oxalates interfere with this balance, the eyes don't get the steady supply of nutrients they need to function properly. Over time, this can contribute to blurred vision, eye strain, and even a greater susceptibility to age-related conditions like cataracts and macular degeneration. I've seen this firsthand in my clinic. Harold, a 68-year-old patient, enjoyed salted cashews every night while watching television. Over time, he began to notice his vision wasn't as sharp, especially in the evening. He assumed it was just age, but his diet was a clear factor. Once we reduced his cashew intake and added spinach and pistachios, foods rich in lutein and zeaxanthin, antioxidants that specifically protect the eyes, his vision stabilized, and the progression of his symptoms slowed dramatically. Another patient, Linda, a 72-year-old who prided herself on eating plant-based snacks, admitted she ate cashews by the handful several times a day. She began experiencing eye fatigue and more frequent floaters in her vision. Her blood work showed mild mineral imbalances, which weren't dangerous yet, but explained why her eye tissue wasn't functioning optimally. By replacing cashews with a smaller portion of hazelnuts and leafy greens, her symptoms eased, and she felt more confident driving at night again. Here's something worth asking yourself. If a snack that feels light and healthy is actually interfering with your body's ability to absorb calcium and protect your eyes, is it really the best choice for you at this stage of life? The key isn't to cut cashews out entirely, but to keep them in check. A small portion once in a while is unlikely to do harm, but daily handfuls can quietly tip the balance against your eye health. For older adults, moderation and variety are essential. Choosing nuts lower in oxalates, like pistachios or macadamias, and pairing them with leafy greens, berries, or fatty fish can make a tremendous difference. After 40 years in medicine, I can say this with certainty. Protecting your eyesight isn't about avoiding every risk, it's about stacking the odds in your favor day after day. Small adjustments, like swapping out cashews for more eye-friendly foods, can add up to years of sharper, clearer vision. 3. Walnuts, the good nut that turns bad in excess. Walnuts often carry a reputation as one of the healthiest nuts you can eat, and in many ways that's true. They're rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which support brain health and protect the retina from age-related damage. They also contain antioxidants like vitamin E and polyphenols, both of which are helpful for reducing inflammation. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Too much of a good thing can backfire. Walnuts are very high in polyunsaturated fats, and while these fats have benefits, they're also unstable. If walnuts are stored for too long, exposed to heat, or eaten in very large quantities, those fats can oxidize. When that happens, they generate free radicals, which put extra stress on the retina and lens, tissues that are already highly vulnerable after the age of 60. I remember Susan, a 74-year-old patient who was convinced walnuts were her secret weapon against aging. She ate nearly 2 cups of them every day because she had read they were good for the brain. But when she came in for her eye exam, she was shocked to learn she had early cataracts. Her diet, while full of intention, was actually working against her. Once we cut back her walnut intake to a small handful a day and balanced her diet with more vitamin C-rich foods like bell peppers and oranges, her cataract progression slowed. Science backs this up. A study in food and chemical toxicology highlighted that oxidized polyunsaturated fats generate compounds that can damage proteins in the lens of the eye, contributing to cataract formation. Another paper in the Journal of Nutrition emphasized that while moderate walnut consumption is linked to improved cardiovascular and cognitive health, excessive intake increases oxidative load if it isn't balanced with enough antioxidants. I've seen similar cases beyond Susan. Michael, a 70-year-old retired engineer, snacked on walnuts throughout the day because he avoided processed foods. He complained of worsening glare when driving at night. After checking his diet and storage habits, we realized he kept large bags of walnuts in the pantry for months at a time. Many of those nuts had gone rancid without him realizing it. Once he started buying smaller quantities, storing them in the refrigerator, and eating them in moderation, his symptoms eased, and his night vision became less troublesome. This raises an important question. If a food has clear health benefits in moderation but poses risks in excess, how do you decide what's right for you? For most people over 60, the answer lies in balance. Walnuts can still play a positive role, but the portion should be limited to about 1 ounce, a small handful, each day. They should be stored properly, ideally in the fridge or freezer to slow oxidation. And just as importantly, they should be paired with a diet rich in colorful fruits and vegetables that provide the antioxidants needed to counteract the free radicals from polyunsaturated fats. As a physician who's worked with seniors for decades, my advice is this. Don't let a single superfood dominate your diet. The body thrives on variety. Walnuts are powerful, but only when they're part of a bigger picture, balanced, moderate, and supported by a wide range of nutrient-dense foods. Small corrections in habits, like eating fewer walnuts and storing them properly, can make the difference between protecting your eyesight and quietly fueling the very damage you're trying to prevent. 4. Flavored or roasted almonds. The hidden danger. Almonds are often considered one of the healthiest snacks, and in their raw, natural form they can be a good source of vitamin E and antioxidants that support eye health. The real problem lies in how most people actually consume them. Roasted almonds are usually cooked in low-quality oils that become unstable at high heat, producing compounds that increase oxidative stress in the body. Flavored varieties, honey roasted, salted, or chocolate-coated, bring even more risks. They're packed with added sugar and sodium, and both of these are enemies of aging eyes. High sodium raises blood pressure, and when blood pressure is elevated over time, the delicate vessels that nourish the retina begin to weaken and narrow. Excess sugar contributes to chronic inflammation and worsens conditions like diabetic retinopathy, which is already one of the leading causes of blindness among older adults. I recall a patient named James, age 70, who believed almonds were a safe and healthy choice. What he didn't realize was that the honey-roasted almonds he ate every day were flooding his system with sugar. James already had diabetic retinopathy, and the added sugar in his snacks was silently accelerating the disease. Once he switched to raw, unsalted almonds and reduced his overall sugar intake, his condition stabilized, and his eye specialist noted that the rate of damage had slowed. James's case isn't unique. Another patient, Carol, 67, had borderline high blood pressure and carried small bags of salted almonds in her purse for healthy snacking. Over time, her blood pressure rose further, and she began noticing more frequent headaches and episodes of blurry vision. When we reduced the salted almonds and encouraged her to season raw almonds with cinnamon instead, not only did her blood pressure improve, but her vision complaints also became less frequent. Scientific studies back up these experiences. Research published in the Journal of Hypertension has shown that excessive sodium intake is strongly associated with microvascular damage, including in the tiny vessels of the retina. Meanwhile, studies in diabetes care confirm that higher dietary sugar intake worsens the progression of diabetic eye disease. Both findings reinforce what I've seen in my patients. It isn't the almonds themselves that cause harm, but the way they are processed and consumed. So here's something worth asking yourself. When you reach for almonds, are you choosing the kind that truly supports your health, or are you unknowingly picking a version that undermines it? The answer makes all the difference. The solution is simple. If you enjoy almonds, stick with raw or dry-roasted, unsalted versions. A small handful a day provides nutrients without the excess sugar and salt. Pair them with fresh fruit or leafy greens to create balance rather than stress for your body. After decades of treating older adults, I've learned that the details matter. Tiny choices, like what type of almonds you buy, can have an outsized impact on your vision, blood pressure, and long-term independence. Sometimes it's not about giving up a food entirely, but about enjoying it in its purest, healthiest form. 5. Brazil nuts. Selenium overload. Brazil nuts stand out because they are the richest natural source of selenium, a mineral the body uses to fight oxidative stress and support immune function. In the right amount, selenium can be beneficial, but the problem is how easy it is to go overboard. Just 1 or 2 Brazil nuts can provide more than the daily recommended intake, and eating them regularly in larger amounts can lead to chronic selenium overload. High levels of selenium in the body have been linked to oxidative stress rather than protection, and in the eyes this can contribute to retinal damage, blurred vision, and even faster progression of conditions like cataracts or macular degeneration. I've seen this firsthand. Robert, a 76-year-old patient, ate a few Brazil nuts every morning because he believed they would prevent cancer. Over time, his blood work revealed selenium levels nearly double the safe range. Not long after, he noticed his eyesight declining. Once he cut back his Brazil nut intake and diversified his diet with safer sources of antioxidants, the progression of his vision problems slowed. Another patient, Elaine, 70, followed online advice suggesting Brazil nuts were the ultimate anti-aging snack. She often ate 6 or 7 at a time. Within a year, she began experiencing brittle nails, hair loss, and increased eye dryness, classic signs of selenium toxicity. Reducing her intake not only improved her overall health, but also eased her eye discomfort. Scientific evidence supports these cases. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has shown that excessive selenium intake can damage cellular structures by creating free radicals, especially in tissues that are sensitive to oxidative stress like the retina. The National Institutes of Health warns that long-term intake above 400 micrograms per day, the equivalent of just a few Brazil nuts, can result in a condition called selenosis, marked by fatigue, nerve problems, and vision issues. So the real question is, if a single nut can push you beyond your daily needs, how many are too many? For most adults, one Brazil nut a day is plenty, and for some, even that may be unnecessary if they already get selenium from other foods like eggs, seafood, or whole grains. Seniors in particular should be cautious because the body's ability to handle mineral imbalances declines with age. The lesson here is balance. Brazil nuts can still be part of a healthy diet, but they should never be eaten by the handful. A safer strategy is to treat them as an occasional addition, not a daily staple, and to rely on a variety of foods for antioxidants and eye protection. After decades of caring for older adults, I've learned that moderation is the real key. When it comes to Brazil nuts, less is not just more, it's safer for your eyes, your overall health, and your independence. So there you have it, 5 nuts that can quietly weaken your eyesight over time. Peanuts with their inflammation-triggering fats, cashews with oxalates that stress the eyes, walnuts that turn harmful in excess, flavored almonds loaded with sugar and salt, and Brazil nuts that can push selenium into toxic levels. The big lesson: nuts aren't the enemy. The danger comes from the wrong kind, in the wrong amounts, or in the wrong form. If you choose wisely, raw, unsalted, and in moderation, nuts can still play a positive role in your health. But ignore the warning signs, and those little handfuls could slowly dim the world around you. Your eyesight is priceless. Protect it with smart choices, balanced nutrition, and regular care. I've spent decades working with older adults, and I can tell you this. It's the small daily habits, repeated over years, that make the difference between clear vision and vision loss. If this video opened your eyes, literally and figuratively, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share it with a friend or family member who needs this information, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the health secrets that could change your life after 60. Thank you for watching. Take good care of your eyes, and I'll see you in the next video.